I guess I can't reiterate enough, I guess, about the maps. 2 years ago we did the same thing with the farmers on the Condamine, and we did 300 property maps for people, and it's one of the best things that we could have done was to actually get some mapping out to people to actually assess the whole damage and sort of work out where they're going to head. So, you know, it was really successful in terms of getting some information out to people quickly, and it's, you know, it's relevant and up-to-date data. So, you know, go and grab that while it's on offer. Quite happy if you just want to chat about things as we go. I guess I'm probably, you guys are pretty well used to dealing with this sort of stuff. You're in alluvial landscapes. What I'm talking about is probably not much new, but it's at least rethinking about some of the new technology that might be able to be used to actually help sort of determine what's next. So I want to talk a bit about assessing the sort of damage and loss and what we've done in the past. We're doing exactly the same thing at the Condamine at the moment, again down south, where we've had a massive flood, again 2 years after the last one. So we're going through exactly the same process back down out on the downs. Also looking at some of the things that I think, and I back up what the guys said this morning, even though I missed a bit of that, about the sort of steps to remediation and some of the new technology that's on the market that might be able to assist to get your country back into productivity as quickly as we possibly can. One of the great things about satellite imagery is it provides you a little bit more information than just a pretty picture, which is, well, it's not so pretty looking at the back there, but what you see there is a plain picture, right? It's just a colour image that the satellite's taken back about 10 days ago. This is what we did after the 2011 flood on area-wide basis. We actually do an index on the image itself called NDVI, which is a vegetation type index. And basically we can tell where there's crop, there's only partly crop, or there's no crop. Okay? It's one of those things that we can actually calibrate to tell us where there's been crop loss or damage, or there's some sort of problem with the crop. And this is out on the floodplains down south, but you can sort of see that patch there. You can see the image through that. That means there's actually no crop there at all. It's been completely lost to waterlogging and flooding. And there's bits in here that are, you know, orange and red, are much lower crop growth. So they've actually been affected by waterlogging, not completely killing it, but just affecting it. Then there's areas like the greens and the blues there that are completely unaffected by any sort of waterlogging or flooding damage. So using that same satellite, we can actually assess the sort of amount of growth that's actually in that image at that time in terms of any plant. It could be pasture, it could be wheat or sorghum or whatever it might be, doesn't matter. And any sort of crop we can pick up, any sort of plant you can pick up that vegetation index. So this has been useful for helping people sort of put a number on, for example, this paddock here, how much of that paddock was actually fully affected by waterlogging or erosion, partly affected or unaffected, so we can actually start to ascertain how much hectares we're looking at. So that's a valuable thing, and I think we should, you know, maybe trial a bit of that up here, see if there is some crops that are affected, how that can be used. It's just a little added benefit that we get with the satellite-based technology that we don't get otherwise. The other things, those that have yield monitors is also a useful sort of tool to actually estimate or get a really good handle on how much loss. And this is a guy on the near Jimbor actually, where we yield monitored his farm, and you can see underneath is the image from the flooding, and the yield monitor is the next crop after that. So you can actually see here that these red areas are low yielding, these are high yielding areas. It was $1,260 a hectare he lost in that paddock from that waterlogging. So he was able to ascertain the sort of extent of that loss using his yield monitor. I guess it's wet, and this is from the last time, and I guess silt fans, like was pointed out earlier, is that silt fans are one of the biggest problems. Is how do you actually get them dry enough to actually do anything with? And that spread and dry out sort of concept is really probably the best way of going about it. But we're trying to get a handle here on sort of the actual amount of sediment that was deposited. That's what we're trying to do here, was actually trying to work out how much it's going to cost to bring it back. And yeah, but the sediment is probably the key part of that. What we actually did in this is one of the paddocks I want to talk to you about, is that before the flooding we actually were able to measure his topography using a GPS. So this guy had driven over the farm with his tractor and got the elevation readings from everywhere on the paddock. And then I went back and promptly bogged myself in the silt, trying to work out what the difference is between the deposition and the erosion in that paddock, okay? And tying the two bits of data together to come up with a tonnage of soil loss. Is it worth moving or not? And you know, we nearly bogged the tractor getting that out. Is that soupy? So it's one of the big problems. And this is the map that we come up with. You can't really see the numbers here, but this is the elevation map after the flood, and you can see there's quite a bit of scouring. This was only a 35 hectare field, okay? Then we took the numbers before and after. So where there was erosion, we had a drop in the elevations, and where there was a deposition, we had an increase. And that map on the right shows the erosion in these areas and the deposition down here, as you would expect. It erodes and deposits. In that 35 hectares, there was 35,000 tonnes of soil shifted, okay? And 30,000 of that deposited at the other end. So he lost 5,000 off the paddock. But straight away, what it did was ascertain what we're dealing with. Because, I don't know if you realise, but 1 centimetre of topsoil equals 120 tonnes a hectare, roughly. Okay? So that's, if you're losing, this case he lost 90 centimetres in the worst parts, sort of this deep. We're talking 35,000 tonnes. And if you're talking $1.50 a tonne, $1.50 a cube, basically, to shift that dirt, he was up for that sort of $40,000-50,000 to shift it all back. But before we did this, we didn't have a clue what sort of numbers we're dealing with. Had no idea whether it was 10,000, 100,000, 200,000 tonnes. So GPS could be a really useful tool if you actually have got some data before the floods, come back afterwards and compare the two. If you do have it, it's one of those things. I guess what it made him decide on is what to do with this paddock. And what we actually did was move some of that silt back where practical, but most importantly we made sure that paddock drained, because it wasn't draining anymore, it was just a swamp. So the deposition had made it into a swamp. So since then he spent the money and dragged as much of that dirt back as he could, using a bit of Julia's money at the time, or Kevin's money, whoever was in at the time, and just trying to put a number on that so we know how many tonnes we're dealing with and how much bucks we're talking about. So, you know, I guess from driving in this morning, this is the sort of thing you're dealing with, and it's pretty significant amount of tonnages, and just to shift it all back into the same spot again is just totally out of the question. So how do we actually deal with that from there? Another interesting thing about that field, that's before I got bogged, but that photo is taken up here. And the crop on the right was sorghum, obviously. The crop on the left, which this paddock was mapped, was chickpeas that was ready to harvest. The paddock on the right, where the water came from, with sorghum, absolutely had no damage whatsoever. Where the chickpeas were, there goes 35,000 tonnes of dirt. So it was that simple, you know, and it just brought home to me that we really need to think about what we're growing where. You know, this is his best paddock on the farm, so typically he would have grown all those good crops, but from now on we've just said, look, we just can't afford to grow sorghum, chickpeas or mungies in that paddock anymore. It's just not feasible given the amount of soil loss we've had. This is sort of taking it a little bit to the next step too. Where you do have elevation maps, say you do go in afterwards and get some elevation maps of where the damage has been, you can actually get a sort of assessment there of where all the ponding spots are afterwards. So where you might get a deposition and ponding, you can sort of work out where they are and how big they are, and then look at somehow cutting some drains through to make sure that the water gets away in the future, whether you put a bit of dirt back as well as cut a drain or whatever. But the topography data is pretty important to help you actually decide what to do where, I think. It can be a really useful tool if you've got it available already. Yeah, well, any sort of normal activities you're doing as you're driving across the landscape, like whether you're doing planting or whatever, and you've hit your logging button, on your GPS, you've got all that data sitting on your card. If you've had a harvester with GPS auto steer on it, that's good quality stuff, it'll be collecting it as well. So often it's hidden in the data, you don't even know it's sitting there. Some of the stuff, like Joe's place, we've collected stuff over the years, comes straight off the tractor, pull the data card out, and we've got that information off it. So depending on your system, like John Deere collects it routinely, Auto Farm you have to hit log, you have to start logging. Ag Guide stuff you have to hit log, you have to log the data specifically. Trimble, yeah, it logs it automatically. Yep. Whenever you're doing an activity in a Trimble screen, if you're just not doing an A/B line, but if you're actually doing your logging, you'll actually be collecting that topo data at the same time. No, they don't, and that's the thing. It's all hidden in there, and no one's actually told you that it's all sitting there ready to be used. All that data there, that's all off a John Deere system. All those black dots is where he's driven across the paddock. So every system that's on the market now we can get topo data out of, assuming that you've actually logged, whether it's a Auto Farm or whether it's Ag Guide. Yep. Assuming you go to the higher accuracy GPS, it collects the better information. But yeah, it's all sitting in there. If you've done a spray job, it'll all be sitting in there. Yeah, well, it should even just collect the data anyway. Like as you're doing that activity, it's actually logging what you're doing, and it collects the heights as well.
So how do you go from the raw data of GPS to that?
Oh, you zip it up and you send it to me. That's probably. You can try it yourself. You can, yeah. If you're a bit computerised, you can go for it yourself. Like FarmWorks that Trimble offer. So Trimble offer the FarmWorks program. You can download the data yourself. Have a look at your elevation map all in FarmWorks if you want to go that way. John Deere has Apex. You can look at the elevation data in Apex.
You need special software though.
Yeah. Yep. Probably some work in the early days, but I'm going to show you some stuff that we've been working on lately with GPS buckets rather than laser buckets. I mean, GPS buckets have got a bit more advantage over a laser bucket, but yeah, I mean, typical lasering country is very costly for a dryland cocky to do, so that's why there's sort of new ways of doing things a bit. But yeah, I mean, sometimes you get the worst outcome with a laser bucket too, don't you, where you end up scalping, bringing up all that other stuff underneath, whatever it is, whether it's sodic soils or whatever, and that could be a problem. So yeah, it depends on what your country's like in the first place. That's all it is. Yeah. Oh, it's easy that. Yeah. I mean, look at that one on the floodplain there. Was $1,200 a hectare. He lost in yield. So there's heaps of gain to be had there. Some guys are spending what do you spend on laser bucket work? Like $50, $60 an acre or something. It's pretty expensive, but if you can get those sort of returns, then it's worthwhile doing. But I guess even if you've got this sort of scenario where you've got these big eroded areas, a laser bucket's a bloody good place to start. If you've got a laser bucket, you're well ahead of, on that front, I think. A bucket does a way better job than just a grader board or something. GPS buckets? Yeah, so instead of having laser control, it's controlled by GPS. So I'll jump onto that. Yeah, I'll go back to the other thing, but basically you can actually nominate where you're going to do your cuts and fills. Whereas a laser bucket doesn't know where it is, really. It's cutting to a grade. This actually knows where it is, so you can actually get your cut fills right down. Like the example on the left here is where we've got the paddock draining in any direction. It was 16 cubic metres a hectare to make that paddock drain. Very flat country, but whereas if you make it go all one way, even with the same sort of methodology, with the same thing as you said, you let it flow its way down, it was 130 cubes a hectare, which is way, way, way less than a laser bucket. They might be in the 1,000 cubic metres a hectare realm. If you want to make it flat, So yeah, you can. This stuff's, there's a contractor in CQ now that will do this stuff for you and control the heights with the GPS instead. Here's another example again of sort of flood damaged areas with the contour lines over the top, so you can really see there the contour lines matching up where the crop damage was. So, you know, really a really good tool, getting your elevations off your GPS to actually work out how much cut have I got to do, what's the height difference between where I've got to drop the water. Gives you all those numbers. Something a laser, yeah, would struggle to do. The other thing about lasers is that if you've got a really big paddock with a laser bucket, and funnily enough the Earth's round, it's not flat, it's not a new concept, but if with a laser it actually comes out directly straight, right? And if you have a big paddock, your lasering will actually make ponds in the middle of your paddocks. It'll actually, and a lot of people say this, if you've got a long paddock, it'll actually create a pond in the middle because it's cutting something flat on something that's round. What GPS does is doesn't do that at all. It will cut in relation to the Earth's surface, so you don't get that problem on big paddocks, that is. On little paddocks, it probably doesn't make much difference at all. So there is a few advantages of using GPS height control for buckets over lasers. But if you've got a laser, it's a really good place to start. The other thing, if you've got bank country, I don't know how many blokes you guys have got banks around here. The other thing we've been using, this is a plot from up near Emerald at Capella, where he actually got his GPS data when he was driving up and down over his contour banks, right? And I just pulled it out and put it into Excel spreadsheet and plotted the actual numbers as he drove up and down the hill, and you'll see where all these banks are, but more importantly you can actually see the capacity of those banks. So I can actually see that one there, there's 245, 244, so there's a good 60 centimetres there of capacity in those banks, which is good. Righto? You're getting any less than that, 50 or below, then we're in real strife in this area. So it's another bit of a useful thing to do is to use it to actually get your contour bank profiles to make sure there's enough capacity in them. Because that's what's been happening a lot in the past, is that banks have been slowly filling up and you don't realise how much capacity you've actually lost over time. I guess my thinking about this just takes me back 2 years where we actually had to do a heap of this stuff, and it's still going on. You know, we're still having battles all the time about water flow, but I guess my thinking is that you try and do as little as possible you can to get a tractor in there to plant some crop, and I think that reiterates what we've heard already this morning from Doug. Would agree, is that the most important thing is getting A, cover, and B, or A, cash flow, B, cover. It's probably in that order, is getting something back in there. I guess, like I said before, put back as much deposited soil as feasible. I mean, I think it's too much to ask to put everything back in exactly the same place it was. It's going to be too expensive to do that. Make sure that paddock's going to drain, and you talked a bit about manures, Doug, and I'm a big believer in adding manures to cropping ground, and it doesn't need to be much, you know, and like you've just lost all of your phosphates, you know, all those things that are tied up in the surface, your zinc, your organic carbon, your microbes, all that stuff's gone down the creek. So how can you quickly get that back in the cheapest possible form you can? And that's either adding manures, adding some fertiliser, or getting the crop growing. GPS technology I've talked about, using levelling. I've also talked a bit about changing crop selection. We've actually changed in some of the paddocks I work with down there, getting rid of some crops because it's just too high risk to run them in those parts of the paddocks. The last one, I guess, is the thing that's still ongoing, is that what the imagery does and what your topography maps do is stops a lot of arguments. Now, you'd be the same here as what we've got dealing with on the Downs, is that there's lots of people involved in the floodplain. Someone that up the top here that does something is going to affect this guy right way down here. So everyone's got to be involved, and you've got to understand what's actually caused those problems. And after 2011, roads were one of the major problems that created issues in floodplains, as you already know. But it helped us using the topography information and the satellite imagery to really pick out what those factors were that led to the big problems. And you can actually see it in that data already. I've had a quick scan over that image, and you can see that there's a lot of influence from roads and railway lines, as you know, and those sorts of things. So you need to get councils on board early to get, when they start fixing up roads, what they were doing down south was they fix up a road and go and put another 100 mil of gravel on it. Well, that's just going to make the bloody thing worse, So we spent a lot of time trying to educate council about how you actually build it to fit the landscape, build it to fit the agricultural landscape. That's where it did the damage. You can actually see it there. We had a council bloke, he's a nice poor bloke and all, but I mean, seriously, they got no idea about. They probably have up here. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to take the. I'll get shot as soon as I walk out of the room. This poor bloke though, we had had this farm, right, and all the flood water was coming from over here. The contour lines look like this, and then like this, and this is a road, and that's a road. We had the council blokes there. They wanted to put an invert in here, right? That was going to be like 50 metres wide. This invert up here was like 100 metres wide, and he didn't realise that water went from there to there. He's not thinking about the landscape as such. He's thinking about, what have I got to build this here to get away with the least amount of dirt? I don't want bloody inverts. They hate inverts, right? Because they've got to dig down, put gravel in, and it's all big trouble for them. So, but just to have that discussion with them was so important, because you've got to understand there's 100 metres of water coming in here and there's 50 out here. There's something not right. We've gathered a bit more on the way, and this is a matter of probably 1,500 metres. It's not like it's 10 kilometres away. So I think bringing some of this stuff to some of these guys really helps them understand what they're trying to deal with from a road sense, because all they care about is this bit here, right? That's what they're interested in, is how do I build that road back to the way I want it. So we're encouraging them to build more inverts in these roads to get more water through, more spread, less concentration. But it's hard. I mean, they've got a budget too to live with, but just to help them understand how, by making that 50 metres wide, they just flooded out 500 acres of sorghum. They didn't understand that. So it's just having that dialogue, and I find that mapping is the critical part of that, because there's no lies. You can't, the topography doesn't lie, and the imagery doesn't lie. So you can actually have that discussion with them, and that's why I find that a useful tool. I'm sure your blokes up here are well and truly averse to all that, so. Yep.
Are you better off concentrating that with a main waterway, or letting it spread out over the whole?
Well, I think that's a bit site-specific. In some cases, I'd actually use that to run the water. Yeah, for sure. Most of the time, I'd say keep farming it. I wouldn't make a designated waterway, because you know what happens when you make a designated waterway, don't you? You end up with 3 waterways instead of 1. Because, if you grass it up, you end up, if this is all grass, then you end up with the runners coming down the side. So a lot of the times it's better to actually farm that country again, I think, but you might actually use it as your main drainage course. Because sort of no matter what you do really on a micro scale is going to impact on that, is it? Like, it's not going to change it. And you put grass in it and it'll just jump outside it. So I think you're better off farming it and making it a nice dish shape. That's another thing that a lot of, I guess, road builders are coming to terms with as well, is about channel design. If you make a V channel, you basically double your velocities. Making a well-shaped channel like that is going to help a hell of a lot with erosion. As soon as they build V-shaped channels down the side of the roads, they just creating huge problems. But from an engineering point of view, that's the best way of going because it gets rid of the water. Yeah, so in those cases, I think you're in an alluvial landscape, it's a flooded landscape, they naturally runners everywhere, you've got to farm through them. That's what I think. I don't know what other people think, but that's the way I'd treat them. And I've actually had a guy down south who actually had a big runner through his place. I said, let's use that as their main water exit point. Right? Let's use it. Keep farming through it, but let's use it. Let's make sure it's nice and level and it's got good grade. You know, there's no potholes in it or anything. You know what he did? He went and filled the whole frigging thing in, eh? He thought, he loved burning diesel, right? Absolutely loves it. So he filled the whole thing in. What do you think happened in 2011? Washed it out. And now he's got potholes all through it and bloody weeds this high. You know, if we would have used that as a main drain and kept it flowing, would have been right. And oh God, I'd hate to think how much dirt he shifted. You know, huge amounts of dirt. Is that what you're tending to do? Farming them and.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, I just, we just prolong it from there now, or it's going to keep on eroding and get deeper and deeper, or we prevent it and find grass or, do other.
Yeah, I mean, grass is the ideal solution, isn't it? But it sometimes creates 3 times as many problems as what it fixes, you know, grass waterways. Unless they're slashed and really well maintained, just bigger problems. That's what I see. I don't know what other people think, but I mean, there's definitely a place for grass waterways, but they're in the right sort of place and time. Yeah, on a flooded landscape, it's almost impractical, I think. And then they probably harbour feathertop roads or something, which is not helping your whole strategy to move forward, is it? It's hard to control those weeds.